Hi everyone. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. I hope you can see me clearly here. I have tried to add a little more lighting into in the room in order to get a little more sharpness on the videos. Hopefully you guys can notice that. But anyhow, today's video will be about the Gryphon line in general. As you know, guys, I have owned every single Gryphon stereo amplifier going as far back as 2010. So that would mean I have owned the Gryphon Mephisto, Gryphon Coliseum, Gryphon Antillean Evo, and Gryphon Essence. When it comes to preamplifiers, I have owned their current flagship model, the Gryphon Pandora. Anyway, that said, what I want to address today is essentially who should buy a Gryphon product. What kind of listener do you have to be in order to really invest and buy in some of these amplifiers or preamplifiers? You know that this hobby is very subjective. You know that there's no absolutes, right? When it comes to audio, I do believe that it is all a matter of preference. It's all a matter of what you really like or dislike about a product. There is no perfect product out there. I don't believe that exists. But today, let's focus on Gryphon in general, okay? If you want to know who should buy this product, please watch the full video in its entirety. And hopefully you guys can really enjoy and take notes on whether this is actually a product that you should consider or not. Okay, so if you have been following my channel over the last 18 to 19 months, you should have seen a lot of Gryphon product on my floor. You should have seen every amplifier, every stereo amplifier that they currently produce. Now, as you know, the Gryphon Coliseum is no longer part of their lineup. It was discontinued about a year and a half ago. And I really do not know why that product was discontinued. I have to believe it was simply because it had been in production for over a decade. It could have been that, or maybe it wasn't a popular product due to the design being a vertical, aesthetically speaking, vertical amplifier. It looked like a computer tower, if you know what I mean. And so I do not know if that impacted Gryphon sales. But what I can tell you, I personally never had a problem with the Gryphon Coliseum. It never bothered me that it was a vertical looking device. I never cared. Okay. But that said, if we begin with the overall sonics of a Gryphon component. Okay. So if you're wondering, Jay, what does it really sound like in the room? Tell us a little more about the sound qualities. Tell us about the strengths. Tell us about the overall tonality of the product. Sure. Let me get started with that. Gryphon in general, and I'm going to talk about amplifiers first. In general, they tend to be amplifiers that are about thrust, that are about power, that are about grip, control. Generally speaking, anytime you buy a Gryphon amplifier, you are essentially injecting speed dynamics slam into your presentation. If you have speakers that tend to be sluggish, that don't really open up, that don't really have enough meat on the bones, that they lack this feeling of kicking you in the butt, kicking you in the chest, okay, then I think Gryphon is really going to come into your room and add those qualities, those traits. If you have anemic sounding speakers, it will completely revive your speakers. One of the biggest qualities that I remember having owned a Gryphon product is the soundstage. The massive soundstage, the huge wide presentation, it really always filled out my room. Okay, no matter where I sat in my room, I always got a tremendous amount of soundstage. I can't really say that about many amplifiers that I have owned in the past, guys. As you know, if you have followed me, I have owned over 300 power amplifiers from all sorts of prices, from the cheap, affordable Emotiva to the more high-end, like the Constellations of the world, the Boulders of the world. And I can tell you that I believe no amplifier up until today has done a better job at giving me the large scale of the presentation of the sound of the venue, if you will, that Gryphon has given me. I remember going back in time owning the 2150 Boulders along with the Gryphon Mephisto. And I can tell you that the Mephisto, being a stereo amplifier, yes, I know it's a mono design internally. I know it uses 2 power cords. So it's really as close as you can get to a mono, but in a single chassis. I never felt like it was outperformed by the Boulder 2150s in regards to soundstage. I never felt that the 2150s had a larger scale sound. I never felt that they sounded bigger, even though they had 1,000 watts per side, 2 chassis, and the Gryphon Mephisto only having 175 watts per channel. Guys, I never felt that. I never felt the need to add another mono. That's part of the reason why I never brought the second set of Mephisto monos. I never brought them because of that, because I really did feel that it really did a tremendous job just with a single chassis. That said, maybe today with the XLFs behind me, that would be a different story, right? I do not know. I can't really speak about that, but I do believe that maybe with this level of speaker, I could have heard the differences between the 2150 and the Mephisto because of what the XLF is about. But I don't want to get into the XLF just yet. Anyway, so when you look at a Gryphon amplifier in general, you have to remember that every single model, in my opinion, sounds very different. What does that mean? That means that if you are trying to buy a Gryphon Mephisto, but maybe you do not have the money, but you like the way the Gryphon Mephisto sounds, right? You go and you buy, let's say, the more affordable Gryphon amp, for instance, the Untitled Evo. And you believe that, well, I'm just getting essentially a Mephisto, but in a smaller package. That's not how Gryphon works. That's not how their amplifiers work. If you like a Mephisto and you've heard it and you like what it does, you have to buy the Mephisto to buy those qualities, because the rest of their amplifiers sound very different. If you like the Coliseum but you can't afford it, you can't expect the Untitled Evo to sound like the Coliseum but in a cheaper package. If you like the Untitled Evo but you can't afford it, and you think by buying the Essence you're going to buy the Untitled Evo's personality, that is not the truth either. So what am I trying to say here? Every Gryphon amplifier sounds different. Okay? I'm sure you guys have seen other brands. For instance, Constellation. I'll give you an example. Constellation in general, every amplifier sounds very alike. They sound similar. So you can buy a pair of Constellation Centaur monos, the ones that I have here, right? And will be blown away, right? And let's say you change speakers and you want to get more power, then yes, you can go up to the Hercules and get more power, and the amplifiers will sound virtually the same. So as you move throughout the Constellation line, just remember you're getting more power, more control, more grip, but holistically speaking, it's essentially the same sounding amplifier. It's just about your requirements because of the speakers that you're using in your system. With Gryphon, it is not that way. It changes completely. So let me give you some feedback in terms of what I mean by that. Okay, talk about Mephisto. The Mephisto, in my opinion, was it was the wild child of the room when I had it. The Mephisto was essentially the amplifier, as I mentioned in a previous video, that you have to be patient with. You have to learn how to accommodate. You have to learn how to make it blend in your system. Okay, it isn't a plug and play amplifier. What I mean by that is that you need to be able to bring it home, put it on the right stand, and begin to do the magic of using the right cables with it, the right power cords, and your front end needs to be at the level of the Mephisto. This is the amplifier for those of you who simply love to tweak to the extreme level, who love to go top to bottom through your system and be able to find out what are the weak links of your system. That to me is the personality of the Mephisto. It is for that audiophile that wants nothing but the facts, that doesn't want to be lied to, that doesn't want any sugar coat from the amplification. That is the Mephisto's personality. Who is this amplifier not for? Who should not be buying this amplifier? This is not the amplifier for amateur audiophiles. You all of a sudden have the funds to buy a Mephisto, but your reference points are MSRP wise a third of the Mephisto's MSRP, which is $60,000. I'm going to tell you, be very careful buying a Mephisto. Okay? You have to be understanding of the levels of audiophile gear. The Mephisto is a very, 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 very incredible amplifier, but it demands more from you. And if you are used to amplifiers like the Luxmans of the world, right? MSRP of $15,000. And you know that amplifier is very easy to use it in any sort of environment, right? You can literally plug that with a lamp cord and put it in your system, and it's going to make your system sound pretty musical and pretty engaging, right? But all of a sudden, you're looking at the Mephisto, and you have found the right deal on a Mephisto, and you want to try the Mephisto. Be very careful doing that, because your reference point is here and the Mephisto is up here. You still got quite a gap in here that you need to understand. There are levels to this, okay? So I always like to use car analogies, guys, because most of my audience, yes, is men. Most of you are men, although I do have some women who follow me. So if all you're used to are Toyota Camrys, where the oil changes are $100 every 3,000 or 6,000 miles, right? And all of a sudden, you can move up to a Bentley because you came up on a deal. Be careful, because the maintenance is more expensive, because it's going to require more of you, because it's going to require better tires, because every visit to the dealership is going to be a lot of money. So it's the same thing here with the Mephisto. Okay, it will require you to up your game with power cords, interconnects. It will require that of you. So if you're not prepared for that, I advise against you buying a Mephisto. Okay, so that's the Mephisto in a nutshell. Now, let me move on to the Coliseum. Who is the Coliseum for? The Coliseum, in my opinion, is the power amplifier for someone who wants a very friendly amplifier, an amplifier that, in my opinion, doesn't have many requirements to sound good. It's an amplifier that I think Gryphon made to sound pretty uniform throughout, where it doesn't really call you out. It doesn't really begin to simply beg more of you. All right, it's fine if you put cheap gas in it. It's fine with it. It'll roll with it. It'll make it work. Tonally speaking, it's an amplifier that has a lot of great musicality. The Mephisto, in comparison, tends to be, I would say, more analytical. That's the word. But also, it sounds larger than the Coliseum, right? It's going to sound larger. It's going to have more bass control than the Coliseum. But that does not mean the Coliseum does not have any bass. It still has a lot of bass, a lot of control. It still allows you to hear deep into the recording, but it tends to file down a lot of the blemishes of the presentation. It tends to apply room correction, if you will, on the not so good parts, not so good recordings. That's what the Coliseum tends to do. And it makes everything sound extremely just pleasant. I mean, that's the word, guys. It's very pleasant. It's really, really a beautiful presentation. Now, musicality is something that I've always found that the Coliseum has had in space in my room. It has that beautiful Gryphon soundstage. It has that beautiful Gryphon bass control. But there are knocks on the Coliseum. What are the knocks on the Coliseum? I'm going to tell you one of the knocks that I have on the Coliseum that I felt was not to my liking was the fact that it never made a recording sound like a 10. Everything it tried hard, including bad recordings, it tried very hard to make everything sound like an 8. 10 being the highest grade that you can give a recording. It always landed at an 8. Okay? It could never master and turn a presentation into a 10 like the Mephisto could. Okay? And that's what differentiates both designs, both amplifiers. Okay? So, if you're happy with every recording sounding like an 8 instead of a 10, when it's needed, of course, when the recording calls for it, I think you are the perfect buyer for a Coliseum.